Welcome back to our YouTube channel. In today's video, we will find out the top 10 best Roblox SCP games. Without further ado, let's get into the video about the game themes. SCPs, anomalies, are NPCs, non-player characters, or objects found throughout the map. They include friendly, neutral, and hostile SCPs who will follow nearby players except for SCP-002, SCP-1025, SCP-1299, SCP-2950, SCP-008, and SCP-409. SCPs are designated as safe, Euclid, or Keter. All hostile SCPs will attempt to kill all players regardless of the team, while friendly SCPs will follow the player without causing any damage. SCP-999 and SCP-131 are capable of producing positive effects, with SCP-999 able to heal players and SCP-131 able to temporarily immobilize SCP-173. Some hostile SCPs are unable to move and will only kill a player if they interact with them. SCPs cannot be killed and can only be restrained by luring them to their containment chamber, except players infected with SCP-008 or SCP-409, but SCP-173 and SCP-096 can be contained by pressing the left button on them, such as RRT or MTF. There are a total of 15 SCPs in the game. Most SCP safes require an L0 access card, Euclid requires an L1 access card, and Keter requires an L2 access card. However, this may vary depending on the SCP. Chaos Insurgency and Class D can attempt to breach the SCPs, while the Foundation Fighters must recontain the breached SCPs. It is against the rules to violate any SCP, with the exceptions of SCP-131 and SCP-999, which may roam the premises as a Foundation staff member, and the game will mark Foundation staff violating SCPs as dishonest. Trolling infractions are also not allowed, except those orchestrated by the IC or the role of the CD. Here are the top 10 best Roblox SCP games. Number 10. SCP-023. SCP-023 is a large, hairy, sexless, 1.5 meters at the shoulder dog with black fur. Whenever an individual makes eye contact with SCP-023, that person or a member of their family will die exactly one time. 1 year after breaking eye contact, autopsies of individuals killed by SCP-023 show that although unharmed, their remains were stuffed with highly compacted ash, including, but not limited to, all organ systems and the circulatory system. Number 9. SCP Secret Laboratory. SCP Secret Laboratory is an online multiplayer game released on March 1, 2017, created by Hubert Mosca. The game is currently in beta. It is created in Unity Engine. Players are assigned random factions consisting of D-Class personnel, Mobile Task Force, Epsilon 11, Chaos Insurrection, Scientists, Facility Guards, and SCPs 049 and 049-2, 079, 096, 106, 173, 939-89, and 939-53. Each faction has a different objective and victory status. Class D personnel and scientists must flee the facility. MTF and the facility guards must neutralize the agents of the Chaos Rising, Class D, and SCPs. Chaos must kill the scientists, the facility guard, and the MTF. The SCPs must kill all other factions. The game was released on Steam on December 30, 2017. It is a highly customizable and modified game. The best multiplayer SCP game around, free. Future SCPs considered for play include SCP-457 and SCP-966. Number 8. SCP, The Endurance. The game has been operational since 2014, but the original code has been dropped. The project had a 2015 trailer. It was called 5 Nights in SCP Facilities. The game is based on SCP-CB and the popular 5 Nights at Freddy's game series. In 2019, the code was rewritten and the game is playable, but some things need to be completed. A new trailer was released in January 2019 to celebrate the developer's recent reach of 500,000 subscribers. The game is available for free on GameJolt and has an FNAF fan games page, where it is also available for download. Number 7. SCP SCP-087-B. SCP-087-B is an unofficial sequel to SCP-087 and is similar, but with a different view of stairway structures and SCP-087-B. The game was created by Regales on January 8, 2014. The game includes some enemies that attack the player if the player doesn't look at them. This game is considered a springboard for SCP, Containment Breach. Number 6. SCP-432. SCP-432, created by Sky Midnight Labs in 2012, is about exploring a canon SCP. To summarize, the SCP holds the features of a storage cabinet with the inside almost representing a maze with SCP-432-1 roaming the maze looking for its next prey. You play as a D-Class with the given objective of collecting 5 artifacts and returning safely with the possessions. SCP-432, equipped with a flashlight and a couple of glow sticks, you are left with very little light. You must also be on the watch for SCP-4321 and the artifacts. Once you have the artifacts, search for a metal door and escape the cabinet. Currently, there is another game with the same idea with a different purpose, which is about finding a box somewhere in the maze. Overall, it's a good game, and you can have some good spooks from it. Number 5. SCP Secret Laboratory. SCP Secret Laboratory is an online multiplayer game released on March 1, 2017, created by Hubert Mosca. The game is currently in beta. It is created in Unity Engine. Players are assigned random factions consisting of D-Class personnel, Mobile Task Force, Epsilon 11, Chaos Insurrection, Scientists, Facility Guards, and SCPs 049 and 049-2, 079, 096, 106, 173, 939-89, and 939-53. Each faction has a different objective and victory status. Class D personnel and scientists must flee the facility. MTF and the facility guards must neutralize the agents of the Chaos Rising, Class D, and SCPs. Chaos must kill the scientists, the facility guard, and the MTF. The SCPs must kill all other factions. The game was released on Steam on December 30, 2017. It is a highly customizable and modified game. The best multiplayer SCP game around, free. Future SCPs considered for play include SCP-457 and SCP-966. Number 4. SCP-3008, Lone Survivor. SCP-3008 is a game based on the story of SCP of the same title, created by Thalmill Games. Explore the Ekia shop, build a base with furniture, eat some meatballs, and try to survive the attacks of the mutated personnel. There are a variety of game mechanics, including demolishing furniture to collect crafting items, traps of all kinds, skill upgrades with different upgrade paths, upgrades, and more. Development started in September 2017, and since September 2019 the core team is made up of Noonkrad, 2 programmers, and a concept artist. The best versions are free, but to get the latest versions, you need to subscribe to the creator's Patreon. Number 3. SCP Liberation. SCP Liberation is a 2D SCP game started in 2018, based on Containment Breach and SCP Foundation, built on a custom game engine. While similar to Containment Breach, it also contains newer SCPs such as 2121 and XXXX. The game can be found on GameJolt, IndieDB, and itch.io, and will be released during version 1.1 or 1.1-2. Upon launch, you will have over 200 arcades to explore and a wealth of content to enjoy and experience. The game has a custom game engine made up of nothing more than basic logic, effort, and time. It is currently being developed by an Alberino Empire person, so the release may be delayed, but the longer it takes, the more effort and content there will be in the finished product. Better packed with content than hasty and sloppy. Discontinued citation needed. The last update was in May 2019. Number 2. SCP Blackout. The demo of this VR game was released on March 1, 2019, and the game was launched with early access in August 2019 for Steam. It is compatible with PC and VR. The developer info page says Story Mode Full Game, targeting 2020, but it doesn't look very realistic, December 2020 now. But the developers are active on Twitter and seem to continue developing the game. The partial description provided on the Steam page. a virtual reality desktop game where you are a new Class D personnel in a secret SCP research facility when everything collapses. Use what you can find as you explore the facility. Access the logs to learn about the SCP entities in containment and execution for his life as an escaped SCP entity. Number 1. SCP Terminal. SCP Terminal is the first text-based SCP game and the first SCP game that has the ultimate goal of all SCPs on the entire SCP Foundation Wiki. The first public alpha was released in 2019. Featuring a custom game engine framework, it is a very interesting project and is also one of the most exclusive SCP games that have been seen in a while by Containment Breach. It is text-based, but the game will be the greatest SCP game ever created. It will include each SCP on the wiki when it is ready. It will take a long time to finish, but each update will have a guaranteed large number of new SCPs added to the game. Tell us in the comments section which is your favorite SCP game. That's it for today. Hope you enjoyed watching today's video. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for more such amazing content. We will see you in our next video. Till then, take care, goodbye, thanks for watching.